Adrian Keller had everything. A brilliant career, a beautiful wife expecting their second child, and a little girl who thought he could fix anything. He was a surgeon at the top of his game, proud, certain, and convinced that God was just a myth. But on the night his daughter's life hung by a thread, something appeared in his office no science could explain. What happened next changed every belief he ever mocked. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it there right now. I love seeing how far stories of faith reach. Now, let's go back to the night it all began. The year the city felt colder than usual, the snow began before dawn and did not stop. From the 10th floor of St. Michael's Hospital, the Chicago River looked like a gray vein sealed beneath ice, the bridges skeletal against the dim sky. In his office overlooking it, Dr. Adrian Keller sipped black coffee that had long gone bitter, one hand resting on a stack of patient charts, the other tightening on the cup to keep warm. The faint scent of antiseptic drifted through the air vents, mixing with the hum of fluorescent light. He liked that smell. Sterile, predictable, proof that nothing beyond science governed the world. For nearly 2 decades he had built his life on that certainty, shaping every hour around skill, order, and logic. His colleagues called him the best neurosurgeon in the city, though few called him kind. Faith, he often said, was anesthesia for uncertainty, and he had no need for either. At home, his precision had worn thinner edges. Laura, his wife, managed what his long hours left behind: school forms, late dinners, the small rituals that gave their daughter's life shape. Emily was 10 now, bright, talkative, forever sketching faces in the margins of her notebooks. She adored her father, but saw him mostly in fragments: a coat moving down the hall, a kiss on her hair that smelled faintly of disinfectant. He told himself that success bought them safety, that love was proven by providing. Each morning began the same way: coffee, coat, traffic, charts, the rhythm of a man who believed the universe could be controlled if one held steady enough. But what began as another ordinary winter morning would, before night fell, erase every illusion of control he had ever trusted. At 7 a.m., Adrian Keller began rounds. He examined a post-op patient, gave orders, dictated a report, the words clean and automatic. When a young resident mentioned the word miracle while describing an unlikely recovery, Keller smiled the way he always did, polite but distant. Medicine, he said, is the study of causes we haven't named yet, not miracles. The resident laughed nervously and nodded, and the moment passed. By noon, the sky had gone from white to steel gray. Snow pressed thick against the windows, muffling even the ambulance sirens outside. Keller barely noticed. He had lived too long inside the rhythm of hospitals to let weather intrude. Then his phone buzzed. A name on the screen: Laura. His wife rarely called during hours. He answered with half his attention still on a chart. The voice that came through was broken, high, filled with panic. "Adrian, it's Emily. She collapsed at school. They're bringing her there. Please." The rest dissolved into static. He didn't remember leaving the room. One moment he was speaking, the next he was already moving, his coat still on the back of his chair. The hall lights blurred as he walked fast past the nurse's station. His footsteps echoed sharply against the tile. When he reached the emergency intake, he saw the flash of the ambulance lights through the frost on the glass doors. He was at the stretcher before it stopped moving. Emily lay unconscious beneath the oxygen mask, small against the white of the sheets, her hair matted to her forehead with sweat. The nurse spoke rapidly: vitals, pulse, oxygen saturation. None of it mattered. His eyes were fixed on the monitor, on the uneven rhythm of her heartbeat. He followed as they pushed her through the radiology wing, the smell of disinfectant thick in his throat. The CT scanner filled the room with its mechanical hum, each rotation of the ring slicing time into seconds that felt unbearable. When the image appeared on the screen, his body reacted before his mind did. A small, dark bubble, lodged deep where few surgeons dared to go, a cerebral aneurysm, delicate, near rupture. He felt the cold of the room seep into him. The attending physician began to speak, suggesting names, options, second opinions. Keller cut him off quietly. "No, I'll do it." The other man hesitated, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. "It's your daughter," he said. "Exactly," Keller replied, "and I know her brain better than anyone else ever will." He didn't look at Laura when she arrived, her face raw from crying. She stood behind the observation glass while he filled the surgical consent form. Her pen scratched the paper once, the sound quick, final. He told her it would be fine, that it was simply a matter of geometry and patience, and that she should get some rest. She looked at him like she wanted to believe it, but didn't. When evening came, the hospital quieted. Visitors left, lights dimmed, and the sound of snow against the windows took on the rhythm of static. Keller stayed at his desk, surrounded by printouts of the angiograms, the faint blue of the monitor painting his face. He studied the images until they blurred, tracing vessel lines with the tip of a pen, whispering to himself about approach angles, incision points, blood flow patterns. His reflection in the dark window looked gray and unfamiliar, like a stranger caught in motion. But something was already shifting inside him, something small and unseen, waiting for its moment to surface. He reached for another cup of coffee, realized his hand was shaking, and set it down carefully. The tremor was slight, but unmistakable. He lifted the hand closer to the light, watched the tiny vibration move through his fingers, and felt his stomach tighten. It wasn't fatigue, it was fear, clean and absolute. He pressed the heel of his palm against the desk until the knuckles whitened, then let go, breathing out slowly. His eyes wandered to the clock, nearly midnight. He turned off the second monitor, leaving only the lamp. Papers rustled under the faint breeze from the vent. Somewhere in the hallway, an elevator door closed with a metallic sigh. The building felt asleep, yet alive. He leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling tiles, listening to the subtle hum of the electrical system that ran behind the walls. For a moment he tried to imagine what faith might feel like, the way people described it, but the thought evaporated as quickly as it formed. He had always believed control was the only antidote to fear. Now, control was what terrified him. He reached for the printed scans again, traced the same line, whispered, "I'll fix it," as though repetition might make it true. The lamp flickered once and steadied. He rubbed his eyes, whispered again, softer this time, "I'll fix it." Outside, snowflakes pressed against the glass, dissolving into water before sliding down in slow, cold paths. Somewhere inside him, a pressure built, the realization that for all his precision, all his science, he had never faced the possibility that skill might not be enough. The thought lingered like static in the back of his mind. He exhaled through his teeth, long and quiet, then set both hands flat on the desk and stayed that way, unmoving, as if stillness could keep the world intact. The fluorescent light hummed above him, steady and pale. He stared at the reflection in the glass until his own eyes began to blur, and the city beyond dissolved into the same blank gray. The snow kept falling, and somewhere below that frozen skyline, in a hospital that had always been his fortress of reason, a door within him was beginning to open. By the time the last nurse finished her shift, the hospital had quieted into the kind of silence that only large buildings can hold, a low mechanical hum beneath miles of empty corridor. The snow outside no longer fell but drifted sideways in the wind, scraping softly against the tall glass panes. In his office, Adrian Keller sat alone, jacket folded over the chair, sleeves rolled to the elbows, surrounded by open scans and empty cups that still smelled faintly of coffee gone cold. The lamp on the desk cast a narrow circle of light that stopped a few inches short of his hands, and in that small border between shadow and brightness, everything he had learned seemed to lose its certainty. The tremor had returned. It began as a faint vibration at the tip of his index finger, spreading upward through his palm like the slow quiver of a pulse. He lifted the hand, studied it under the light, and for a moment considered the cruel symmetry of it, the surgeon whose hands betrayed him. He set the hand flat against the desk, pressed down hard until the muscles steadied. It did nothing to calm the tremor inside. He whispered to himself, a thin sound in the still room, "You can do this. You've done worse." The words fell into the air like stones and disappeared. He stared at the blue reflection of the monitor on the window and thought of Emily's small face beneath the oxygen mask, the fragile rhythm of her breath. For years he had convinced himself that control was strength, that precision was enough, but now, faced with his own daughter's life, the idea cracked. He felt the panic rising in the center of his chest, a dull, expanding pressure that no logic could compress. But what happened in that office next would defy every explanation he had ever trusted. He stood up abruptly, the chair rolling back against the cabinet. His own reflection caught him by surprise. Pale, hollow-eyed, older than he remembered. He paced once, twice, muttering fragments of the surgical plan. Incision, vessel exposure, clip placement, closure. The repetition offered no comfort. He clenched his fists until the tendons stood out like cords beneath the skin. "Someone, just help me, please," he said without realizing he had spoken. Then, louder, raw, from a place he did not recognize, "Lord, help me." The sound of his own voice startled him. The air shifted as if the room itself inhaled. The hum of the ventilation system faded. Even the light changed, not darker, not brighter, just softer, like the shadow of a cloud passing over the sun. He turned, expecting to see someone at the door. There was no one. Only the faintest outline of movement in the far corner near the window, the place where the city's light usually reflected off the glass. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, counted silently to 3. When he opened them, the outline remained, taking on shape, not transparent, not solid, but real enough to catch his breath. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from pavement. Keller's pulse quickened. The sound of it filled his ears. "This isn't real," he said under his breath. "I'm hallucinating. Sleep deprivation, stress." The figure stepped forward once, quiet, deliberate. Its face was calm, almost human, the features unthreatening but impossible to look away from. The voice that came was steady, low, and absolute. "You asked for help." Keller froze. "No," he whispered. "No, this is stress response. You know the body well," the voice said, "but not the hand that formed it." He pressed his palms to his temples, willing the sound to stop. "You're a hallucination, a manifestation of fear, that's all." His words trembled, more plea than argument. The figure moved closer, light gathering softly around it. There was no heat, no sound, except the faint ticking of the wall clock. "You are not alone in this room," the voice said, "and you will not be alone tomorrow." Keller stepped back, bumping against the desk. His mind raced for an anchor, any rational pattern. "If you're real," he said, barely louder than a breath, "do something physical, something measurable." The figure tilted its head, almost like a doctor examining a patient. Then, without motion, the light above them flickered once and dimmed. Both computer monitors went black, the power light still glowing green. A static charge moved through the air, lifting the small hairs on his arms. Keller gasped, the sound tearing from his throat. The figure's voice came again, quiet, certain. "Your knowledge is enough for the work. Your fear is not needed." Then, as if some unseen switch had been released, the air loosened, the hum of the building returned, and the glow dissolved into ordinary light. The room looked unchanged, every object where it had been, every shadow back in its place. Keller stood unmoving, his breathing shallow. For several minutes he remained like that, eyes fixed on the empty space near the window. The tremor in his hands was gone. He flexed his fingers once, twice, and stared at them in disbelief. Then he said softly, 5 minutes, and looked at the clock. The second hand swept forward in its usual rhythm. He walked to the sink, turned on the cold water, and splashed his face. The sting of it grounded him. In the mirror above the faucet, his reflection looked younger, or maybe simply less rigid. He dried his hands on a paper towel, sat back at the desk, and wrote a short line on his notepad. Possible visual episode, 5 minutes perceived duration. The sound of the pen scratching paper broke the silence. He closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and stood. The air still held a faint warmth that hadn't been there before, something like the residue of light. He opened the door, stepped into the empty hallway, and began walking toward the ICU, his footsteps echoing against the tile. The corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and machine oil. Overhead, the fluorescent lights flickered in long, even intervals. As he passed the security camera mounted above the corner, its red indicator blinked once, then went dark. He didn't notice. No one in that building, not even Keller himself, could have imagined what those missing 5 minutes on the recording would later reveal. He walked on, steady now, unaware of how still his hands had become. the snow light from the windows tracing his path like a silent witness. By morning, the snow had hardened into a thin crust of ice that glittered across the hospital parking lot, and the first light of day came dull and metallic, the kind of light that never fully warmed a room. Adrian Keller had not slept. His face carried the faint pallor of fluorescent hours, and when he stepped into the surgical wing, the smell of iodine and plastic hit him like something both familiar and unreal. He moved through the pre-op routine in silence, washing his hands in water that steamed faintly against the stainless steel sink, feeling the sharp contrast of heat against skin that no longer trembled. Around him, the team prepared in their own rhythms, machines calibrated, trays counted, sterile fields unfolded like small flags of precision. No one noticed that he had not spoken more than a few words since dawn. Dr. Rao, the anesthesiologist, asked once, "You all right, Adrian?" He answered without hesitation, voice even, "Fine." She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary and nodded. He tied his mask, adjusted his gloves, and stepped into the brightness of the operating room. The air was cool, carrying that faint metallic scent of filtered air and disinfectant. The monitors blinked their green pulse, steady, impersonal. Emily lay under the surgical drapes, her small frame reduced to a shape outlined by fabric and wires. Her hair had been tucked away under a cap, leaving only her eyelids visible, faintly bluish beneath the light. He stood still for a long second, letting his gaze settle on her, and then on the tools arranged before him in perfect order. The instruments glowed faintly under the overhead lamp, each one resting where it should, silent witnesses to precision. But what happened inside that room would never be explained by skill alone. He began. The words of instruction came quietly: scalpel, suction, retractor. His tone carried no tremor, no hesitation. Dr. Mendez, his assistant, followed every command with unbroken rhythm. The clock on the wall moved slowly, marking the hours with the soft tick that cut through the hum of the ventilator. Keller's focus narrowed to the field before him. The world outside that small, illuminated space no longer existed. Yet, underneath the noise of machines and the measured rhythm of his breath, something else pulsed, a strange calm, not like confidence, but like being held steady by something beyond muscle or thought. Every motion of his hand followed the last without strain. The memory of the night before pressed faintly at the edges of his awareness, not in words but as light remembered after closing one's eyes. Time slipped. The procedure moved forward as if guided by invisible rhythm. When a minor bleed began, something that could have spiraled quickly into disaster, his hand moved instinctively, compressing, sealing, adjusting the clip with such control that even Dr. Rao muttered, "Perfect." He didn't respond. The sound of his own breath echoed inside his mask, slow and measured. At one point he looked up briefly, only for a second, and the surgical lamp caught his eyes, throwing two small reflections of white across the lenses of his glasses. For that instant, he felt the stillness again, the same absolute quiet that had filled his office hours earlier. And then it passed. When he stepped back, the final suture in place, Emily's heartbeat on the monitor held its rhythm, strong, clean, unbroken. Dr. Rao adjusted the anesthesia flow, murmured to the nurse. Someone said, "Stable," and someone else said, "Beautiful work." Keller only nodded once and removed his gloves slowly, folding them as if the motion required ceremony. The latex stuck slightly to his palms, leaving behind the faint scent of powder. He walked out without speaking, stripped off his gown, and entered the cold corridor. His hands, bare now, looked the same as they always had, but he turned them under the light anyway, as if searching for proof that something in them had changed. He found none. Only the stillness remained, not heavy but quiet, like the air after snowfall. In the recovery room, Laura stood beside the bed, her fingers tracing the blanket near Emily's arm. Keller joined her, still in his scrubs, the smell of disinfectant clinging to his clothes. Emily's chest rose gently with each mechanical breath. "She'll wake soon," he said, voice low, factual. Laura nodded, tears glinting in the fluorescent light. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture awkward for both of them, and for the first time in hours, he felt the sting of emotion pressing at his throat. He stayed beside his daughter until her eyelashes flickered under the tape, a faint movement that seemed to echo through the room. When the ventilator hissed, It sounded almost like a sigh. But the strangest part of that day had nothing to do with the surgery itself. That evening, after the shift had ended and the hallways emptied into the blue hush of night, Keller returned to his office. The coffee from the night before still sat cold on the desk. A thin skin formed across its surface. He switched on the monitor, the glow spilling across the papers. He should have been writing the post-operative report, but his hand moved instead to the corner of the desk, where the small security console blinked softly. He clicked the playback window, scrolling through the hours of the night. At first, everything appeared normal, the corridor outside, dim and still. Then, the timestamp jumped. 2:10 a.m. to 2:15 a.m., 5 clean minutes erased. He leaned closer, rewound, played again. The feed repeated the same skip, the same blank silence. Even the sound log was flat, a perfect line of nothing. His pulse quickened. He pulled up the technical data. The system registered data unavailable, temporary power interruption. But there had been no outage anywhere else in the hospital. He tried another camera feed, another angle. Everything was intact except for his own office. For those 5 minutes, the world had recorded nothing. He sat back, the chair creaking faintly under his weight, and looked around the room as if the walls might answer. The window reflected his face superimposed over the night city, the mixture of streetlights and snow giving the illusion of motion behind him. He printed the maintenance log, the printer's soft hum filling the silence, and held the warm paper until it cooled in his hand. On the margin, he wrote one word in pencil, coincidence, and underlined it once. He turned off the screen, the room falling back into shadow. The faint mechanical noises of the hospital drifted through the vents, a door closing far away, a rolling cart, the heartbeat of electricity in the wires. He sat without moving for several minutes, his breathing shallow but steady. Outside, the snow began again, slow flakes turning the lights along the river into a blur. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the faint reflection of the city, wondering if what had happened was less a miracle than a question left hanging between worlds. He did not pray. He simply sat, the memory of that unearthly stillness returning like the echo of a note that refuses to fade. And somewhere deep in the building, unseen and silent, a small red indicator on the security camera blinked once more, then went dark again. Night slowly folded back into morning, and the light that touched the glass of St. Michael's no longer looked like winter light, but something quieter, almost weightless. The snow had settled into fine dust along the edges of the river, and in the faint hum of the city waking, the hospital felt softer than it had in months. Inside the ICU, the monitors pulsed gently, a small mechanical lullaby against the stillness. Adrian sat beside his daughter's bed, his shoulders rounded forward, the shadow of exhaustion deep beneath his eyes. Emily was awake now, her gaze following the slow swing of the IV line above her. The machines murmured their steady rhythm, and every few seconds a faint tone reminded him she was breathing on her own. He reached for her hand, expecting to find it cold, but her skin was warm. She blinked up at him and whispered something he could barely hear. He leaned closer until her breath touched his cheek. "Daddy, did you fix me?" she asked. He nodded, unable to form a word. The air between them felt lighter than it had in days. The nurse entered quietly, adjusted the tubes, smiled at the girl, and left without a sound. Outside the window, daylight broke across the snow in long, soft streaks. Laura stood a few steps away, her hands folded near her chin, tears gathering and falling before she could brush them aside. Adrian turned toward her. No words passed between them, yet she understood. He stood, rested his hand against her back, and for the first time in years felt what peace actually weighed like. A small, steady warmth spreading through the chest rather than the racing emptiness he had known before. When the rounds began later that morning, colleagues stopped him in the hallway to say the surgery had been flawless, one of his best. He answered each compliment with quiet gratitude, the reflex of a man still learning how to speak softly. He did not tell them that during the procedure he had felt something guiding him, a steadiness beyond skill. They would have dismissed it. So he kept it folded inside like a secret too fragile for words. That evening, when the hospital had dimmed again to its night rhythm, he walked alone to his office. The coffee from 2 days earlier still sat cold on the desk, a faint ring left behind on the wood. He turned on the monitor, and the familiar glow returned, spilling its pale light across the scattered charts. On the shelf above, the maintenance report rested where he had left it, the printed line showing data unavailable, 5 minutes. He stared at the timestamp, then at his own reflection in the dark window. Outside, the streetlights along the river shimmered through a thin veil of snow. He reached out and touched the glass as though to steady the world beyond it. In the reflection, his hand looked older but steadier. He whispered, not to the room and not entirely to himself, "It wasn't nothing." The words hung there, soft, almost reverent. The air felt warm, like breath returning to a frozen room. For the first time, he realized that the silence surrounding him no longer frightened him. It felt like a companion waiting rather than an absence demanding to be filled. He exhaled slowly, a quiet prayer hidden inside the breath, though he wouldn't have called it that. He stayed like that for a long while, watching snow gather at the edges of the window until everything outside blurred into white. The lights from the monitors pulsed behind him, rhythmic and calm, like a heartbeat keeping time with his own. The sound of it steadied him, reminded him that control had never been the source of peace. Trust was. And in that moment, surrounded by the faint hum of machines and the faraway whisper of falling snow, he felt the first trace of faith touch him, not like revelation, but like recognition. There are moments when what we see defies reason, yet leaves behind something gentler than proof. Faith is often born not in certainty, but in the quiet after fear, when the mind stops grasping and the heart finally listens. Let us pray for those who still seek light in their darkest moments, for every mother and father who sit beside a hospital bed, praying for steady hands and another breath, and for those who, like Adrian, have built their lives on reason but long secretly for something greater. May they find courage in their weakness, peace in their waiting, and the grace to recognize the hand that steadies them when they can no longer steady themselves. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need a reminder that no prayer goes unheard. Tell us in the comments what moment in your life reminded you that God still moves quietly among us. If you have ever felt that light in an unexpected place, we would love to hear your story. And if you know someone facing fear tonight, send this to them as a whisper of hope. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Sometimes faith does not arrive with thunder. It enters like breath in a silent room, and it stays.